Thanks for tuning into this episode of Fintech Focus TV, powered by Harrington Starr, the global leaders in financial technology recruitment. Head over to the Harrington Starr website where you'll be able to find all the latest jobs in financial technology across the globe. You'll also be able to download the latest issue of the Financial Technologist magazine, including the Top 1% Workplace Awards. Finally, if you're looking to grow your team, please get in touch. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. And today in the studio, I am absolutely delighted to welcome the author of Sales Unplugged. It's Michael Walford-Grant. How are you?
Well, Toby, very good, thank you.
Nearly caught you in the...
you did,
in your line there. Listen, great to have you on board. We caught up after a long time a few weeks ago, just before I went away on holiday. I think you sent me very, very kind to send me over the book for a little bit of holiday reading whilst we were out there. It's a subject I'm really passionate about. I think the sales industry is a difficult one to get right. But when people do get it right, I think it's a really fulfilling career.
Yep.
And this space, the financial technology space, has got some of the best salespeople I've worked with.
Yep.
They're doing some incredible things with some incredible products at various different stages. Yep. And I know how passionate you are about your career and where you're at the moment. So we'll come on to the book. We'll come on to a few thoughts about what you're talking about. But before you do that, can you introduce us? Yep. And tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're doing now as well.
Yeah, of course. Good. So Michael Walford-Grant, and I guess it's fair to call me a veteran sales guy, as most people can see with the grey hairs and such like. But remarkably, and it's actually one of the stories in the book, my sales career began in 1987. Which for those
when you were putting a few of the things that were out on, like the music that was there at that sort of stage,
that's right, exactly,
and the films that were out there.
So it's pretty good. And that career started in St Alphege House, right by Moorgate. Yeah. And the world and the city was very different back then than it is now. And that was with NCR, National Cash Register Company, as was. And I did 5 to 7 years there as a sales guy, working in a large account team. And that's where I really cut my teeth and learned my trade. The fabulous thing about a company of that size is they train you properly. And the foundations of my sales career really started there, and I have a lot to be thankful for doing that. But I think just to sort of cut in there, I think that's such an important part of it as well, isn't it? So when you see people who've had strong longevity to their sales careers, so often it's that initial play. Like I was very fortunate to go into a sales organisation at the start of my career. That was that had excellent training, outstanding training. There's a long list of people who've had very good and long careers that came out the same sort of stable. Yes. And I think when you say that, it shouldn't be underestimated, and particularly for people who are who are new, coming into the industry, etc. That significance of getting a place that's got the right sort of training and development and program and structure and process. Yeah. And I know, look, when I was reading the chapters of all of this, when I was looking at the formula, it's a formula that comes all the way through it. And I think sometimes people just say, right, there it is, there's your job, you go out and sell. Yep. And that's where you see the attrition of sales. Sure. And I think when you've got people in there who are looking to build a career, I'd say a very important part is finding that sort of initial landing ground. Absolutely, yeah. And as we'll come on to, in fact, probably now, subsequent to that, I then worked in much smaller companies. Yeah. But without that foundation, my ability to be more independent, self-sufficient, not have a support structure around me, I would probably have failed if I hadn't had that original foundation. So I'm a huge fan. Yes, after that, I went into working for much smaller companies, and then I had like a 20-year period that was really crucial to my career, which is I specialised in first man in roles. Okay. So foreign-based companies that had some success, perhaps, in their home market, but wanted to open up here in the UK. Yeah. So the first real first man in, opening an office and all this sort of thing, was with a company called Polake, who was subsequently bought by Bloomberg. And then I did something similar for an Austrian company, AIM Software, subsequently bought by SimCorp. So They were great experiences, but my goodness, the responsibility you take is enormous. And you've got to have, you know, the strength, the shoulders to take that, because you may be one of only 2 sales contributors in the company. And there's a team of 10, 15, 20 people whose salaries every month rely on you performing. So there's no hiding place. I felt I was ready to take on those responsibilities, and so I did that, and then a short return to a big company, FIS, SunGard, had just acquired SunGard, did 4 years of that. But 3 years ago, well, 1 month before the pandemic, whatever that was, I started my own sales consultancy. And that was very much with the thought that I'd worked at these first man in roles, and I recognised that there was a gap in the market for companies that are on the smaller size, often foreign coming into the UK, but not necessarily, that needed their sales processes to be more effective. And so I have a term for my business, which is improving sales effectiveness. So every company must be selling, otherwise they wouldn't exist. But they could probably sell more effectively, and that's my
I think that's such an important part of it, isn't it? So sales effectiveness is, to me, encapsulates a whole area of optimization, of efficiency, productivity. I was reading the paper this morning about the sort of productivity crisis, showing the first signs in the UK of a move further forward.
Right.
In certainly a number of years. And I look at it in sales, and I think, right, the cost of sales people and the cost of running a sales organisation has increased dramatically.
Yep.
I'd look at it in my industry, and the cost of sale back in when I first started in the late 90s compared to now is astronomically different. Now the return hasn't matched the same sort of levels. So what we're looking for is efficient ways to make people better at their. Now look, there's technology that comes into that.
Yep.
There's marketing that comes into that.
Yep.
But alongside that, there's an ability to improve people and to make them the very best they can possibly be at their job. And I think sometimes that sort of technical sales development, sales coaching, can be very ad hoc from businesses. And overlooked, absolutely. Yeah. And so, and I'm really fascinated about your first man on the ground sort of mentality, because we, in a number of our businesses, we're there with startup businesses, and that might be pre-seed, that might be Series A. These are businesses that are starting to look into new territories and put people into it, which is a very difficult job.
Right.
And if you look at the sales roles and the churn that are in it, the number of people who get that first hire right is so minimal, it's incredible. And I think there's some statistics which I won't fudge, but I was talking about the other day, which is a staggering failure ratio of people who are doing are hiring their first people on the ground within what they're doing. And what I love about this book is it's very pragmatic, it's very open and honest. I mean, that you talk there about the good, the bad and the ugly. It's not all just a story of me and my great career and success.
Absolutely not.
It's got some pretty brutal stuff in there.
It has got some very brutal
towards
stuff,
in there, going back to where you're faced with performance improvement plans and all that sort of stuff. So this is a pathway that sees the good, the bad and the ugly of it, which I loved about that, because I think sometimes you read these books and it's all me and my perfect career. If we're looking at that and we're thinking about that, and people are watching this and thinking about hiring their first person on the ground, or people who are going into that role and saying at the same time as you, this is my time now to do that particular job. Talk to me about some of the traits, qualities and skill sets that you think would be particularly important in that.
Yeah, good. So they've got to be independent. They've got to be self-sufficient. They're not now going to have a marketing department behind them, or the PowerPoint specialist, or whatever it might be. So there's got to be a sense of, I can stand up and roll my sleeves up and get involved. And obviously there's some salespeople for whom that doesn't lend their skills. They're much better at the, if you like, the more senior level, where they've got a team around them, and that really, brings out their core skills. So you've got to be pragmatic, you've got to be able to roll your sleeves up, and you've got to be prepared for some pretty difficult times, and you've got to be resilient and tenacious and know that there will be pressure times. You're typically working for a smaller company. It won't have big budgets. It is reliant upon a revenue stream from sales that is frequent. And so just having character to be able to endure that, but also perform. That's the important thing. You mustn't become a shrinking violet. You've still got to be able to perform.
How do you think you test that? Because I agree with you with all of those things, right? And that skill set is not a generic skill set. And I think there's there's naturally in sales a hubris, a level of ego that sort of comes with it.
Of course.
And quite often there's a narrative that runs through people's heads that it's all about them as opposed to what they've been before. So let's take someone from FIS, for example.
Sure.
You leave an FIS with everything that it's got behind you as a salesperson. Even the brand at certain stages, and arguments about whether that's a good or a bad thing at various different stages around it. But you then come out and you think, right, I've sold X and Y and Z.
Yep.
And sometimes it's the brand that's allowed you to sell X and Y and Z.
Very good point.
So people come into this sort of thing, and and as a person hiring you first on the ground, you want to say, right, I want that impressive CV. I want someone who's done something with Bloomberg or FIS or wherever it might be. But realistically, is it that person who you're looking for? Or is it someone who's done something and moved it all the way through? Now, the answer might not be the same on each part of it, right?
Yeah.
But I think from a hiring perspective, when you're looking at taking on your first go-to-market person in that business, in a new territory, it's a very difficult hire to make. And what we're seeing at the moment in the marketplace is an awful lot of procrastination about that. So we're dealing with companies there who are saying, yes, I want to do this, and having 18 different people involved in interview processes just so no one can be given the blame on it. We want them to present to a board. And if you've got 7-8 people in an interview process, someone's going to naturally feel the need to find a problem, right?
Yep, of course.
So you've got this decision paralysis about hiring the right salesperson.
Yeah.
So it's this contradiction between wanting to make the right hire and do it right and get the right person versus making no decision. And losing talent that might be the best people for your business. So I'd just like to give people something there where you can say, look, when you're looking at that and you've got those characteristics which you're talking about, which are absolutely the right things to go in and test. If you were to hire your first person on the ground tomorrow, what would you be doing to make sure that had a higher chance of success?
I think the key, and you do make a very good point in terms of sometimes a salesperson will come out of a biggish company with the brand, which means when they do a new development, cold call, let's just call it that. I mean, that one tries to avoid those because they're not that effective and not very much high productivity on that. But you know what I mean, in so much as, they're got that brand, they're more likely to get a meeting, secure a meeting or secure 5 minutes on the phone call with a senior executive than if you're ringing from a company that they've never heard of. Never heard of, because there's no profile, there's no presence over here. So that tenacity, that resilience and a demonstrable track record of new business selling is key. And as you know, in your business, there are hunters and farmers, and some are hybrid, and I always consider myself sort of hybrid. But throughout my career, everyone is more interested in those big elephant wins I had, and I understand why, because you look back and some of them are highlighted in the book. They are tough sales. They're really tough.
You go on a journey with it, right?
You absolutely do. So yes, I think if there is those kind of profile of companies looking for their first man in, definitely looking at, and I'm sure you would endorse this in your you can always teach them about the product and the technology. It's attitude and hopefully some track record just to demonstrate that they have experienced this type of thing. Now, of course, I was hired into these sorts of roles without that track record. So some people, took a chance on me, and they didn't all go right. Let's, as you said, I haven't had a career that's just gone in one direction. There's been lots of ups and downs. But I think that's probably the key thing.
And let's flip the narrative to the other side of the coin now. So you're a salesperson who's doing their first gig, and you're going on site, you're about to kick off and do this. And this is the sort of nature of the book, right? You've got a process that includes prospecting and meetings and presentations and proposals and knowing your competition and pitching. And actually, I love at the end of it the chapter on mentality as well, which I think is often underlooked. It can all be very technical, a lot of sales books.
But the mentality side of things is just as, in practice, even more critical than all of it put together.
Yes.
So if you're to give a nod to those sort of people and say, right, let's have some top tips here for for someone who's been given that gig, who sat there as a first feet on the ground person, what sort of sales advice would you give that individual?
You've got to add value. You know, the whole sales buying process, because of my age, I've seen it transition over more than 30 years. And as most people, perhaps some people, or most people watching this, I don't know, acknowledge and recognise that the process is so different now than when it was. So the point being that when you actually engage with a prospect, they may already be 70 or 80% of the way through their buying process, because they haven't needed to go out and talk to vendors, particularly because all the information's on the internet, with colleagues, with peers in the industry, so they can pretty quickly narrow down, you know, the 2 or 3 potential suppliers that there are for any given project. So what you've got to do is be the trusted advisor, because what they want to do is they want to know what's coming next. So I use a term called the unconsidered need. If you can have a meeting with someone where you introduce something that they hadn't considered, that they hadn't thought of, and acknowledge that it's quite an important factor that they should consider whichever direction they take, then you're standing out from the crowd. And if you stand out from the crowd, then you're more likely to get the second, the third and the fourth meeting than perhaps your competition. So it is very much trusted advisor, be adding value the whole time. And, you know, whenever you ring for a meeting or you send an email or whatever, you've got to be clear, why does that person going to say yes? Why should they give up 20 minutes, half an hour of their very precious, busy day to see you? And if you're not adding value, they'll soon say, I won't bother seeing you anymore.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? And to me, it's always boils down to the simplicity of the discovery. And my view of a number of salespeople is that they will go in there and they'll have an agenda of what they want to say to people. They have an assumed need of what they want to be selling it to. They'll be saying, you've got this problem, and they'll be polished and rehearsed, etc., etc. But it might not necessarily identify and humanise that particular issue for that particular person.
Yeah.
And to me, where the most successful people that I've worked with and seen across this space are the ones there who'll spend time actually listening, and they won't ask just the first question and then say, right, that's what I need on my tick list so I can now start selling. They have patience and are looking out, and when you come back to that sort of future need, etc., you're trying to understand and create that solution that you're able to sell to there afterwards. And I think if there's a skill set which I think is chronically lacking at the moment in the world of sales, I think if there's one tick that would make a massive difference in the sales, the success of salespeople globally, I would say it's the ability to ask better questions than anyone else, which gives you the answers then, which you can then tailor.
Then lead into. I mean, when people, sometimes you see these interviews, it says, what's the best advice you ever got? And the best advice I ever got was, Michael, you've got one mouth and two ears, use it in that proportion. And it's quite a cliched statement, but my goodness.
It's worked for you.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I have managed to sustain a career is because I'm not a natural talker. I'm not as extrovert as a lot of people. I'm quite happy being quite, quiet and listening and letting other people take the lead. And that ability to listen. And the more that your prospect is talking, the more you're going to learn, and the more you've then got to hang on to match their requirements with what you have to offer or what you could offer.
There's an interesting sort of piece you bring up there, which is about the sort of, the background of the salesperson. This goes back to a hiring piece as well. So I think it's really interesting you just talked about the introvert, being more introverted than the traditional salesperson, because I think, you kind of think about this and you paint a mental image in your head of what a salesperson looks like, right? And it's it's slick, it's noisy, it's confident, it's out there, and I think over the last 20 odd years, I've seen this evolution of a salesperson within financial services. Right. So it was very much the sort of relationship orientated wine bar, dwelling salesperson who could take people out and win friends and influence people off the basis of that.
Yeah.
I think as boardrooms and companies have got a lot more technical, their patience for that sort of salesperson is diminished accordingly. As one's gone up, one's gone down.
Yep.
And so what we're seeing at the moment is when people are hiring salespeople, they're looking for a much more knowledgeable salesperson.
Yep.
You mentioned before about buyer beware. It's kind of seller beware now, because people will be able to do that research before they're in there. So it's changed and shifted the narrative.
Yep.
Because people are much more informed when they come into that sales thing. They're much more informed than potentially the salesperson about what can and can't be sold to them.
Yes.
So the ability to blag as a financial technology sales specialist, I think, has gone backwards, incredibly. And the ability to rely on just a pre-sales person, to dig you out of it, I don't think is quite the pathway as well. So we're almost seeing this sort of hybrid pre-sales / salesperson morph into one position and have a much more credible sale that's going on there as well. Is that something you've seen?
Absolutely. It aligns with the what we just said around being a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
You've got to feel that you understand their business. If you don't understand their business, why would they do business with you? So that goes with having knowledge of your product, having knowledge of the market, having knowledge of the pressures and challenges that the individual that you're meeting with is faced and will face in the future, and just being able to communicate and articulate that in a confident manner makes somebody feel, okay, that these types of people and who he represents is a sort of partnership I could see has got value. Rather than it being an us and them, and that's the challenge, and it cuts both ways, Toby, doesn't it? We want the buyers to be a bit more open with us as salespeople, and then and vice versa, and obviously both parties weighing each other up. But the strongest engagements that I've had throughout my career is when you manage to break that taboo and you have this really trusting relationship with your buyer, whereby the sum of the parts is much bigger than the individual parts together, because you really work together to get the best deal for everybody, and you're less anxious about maintaining the right margin and such like.
I'm interested, as you said, you've had great longevity in the career, spanning 2-3 decades, etc., etc. And you've been part of that sort of metamorphosis. So the ability to have that sort of chameleon-like change over time, to adapt yourself to each different sales market, must be an interesting journey to be on. Because, as I said, I would say that 20 years ago, your career was very different, or the sell was very different for you than it is today. So how do you keep present with that as things go, and to an element have reinvention and change that comes into the cycle?
So, one of the good things that I've done is remained self-education. So when I left NCR and worked for these much smaller companies who are not going to train you, they don't have training budgets, they wouldn't even know the courses to send you on and such like. I very quickly thought, well, I need to keep training myself. So I subscribed to, newsletters, magazines. There was some sales specialist magazines back then. I have to dig them out. You're probably familiar with them. They're great. And then bought a lot of books. On all the specialist areas.
And was it always the view to make one, do one yourself?
Well, no, absolutely not. No, it wasn't. It was, I've got to be good at this, otherwise I haven't got a career. And so that is how now it's even easier, with webinars and such like, podcasts and so on. But yes, it's that, and that is a very important point, because if you take one of those, first man in roles, for example, then it is extremely unlikely that your employer is going to put aside fees and so on for training. So the key to a long success is to keep being open to new techniques, new concepts, new research, and this book incorporates, if I give them a sound out, is Corporate Visions. I'm an avid watcher and subscriber to their webinars and their ebooks. and they have a mixture of really outstanding salespeople that do webinars, but also the science. So they fit these, you know, these brain machines on and see the reaction to different sales approaches. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
But that has enabled me to, you know, sustain this career.
Talk to me about the book itself and the motivation behind it.
Sure.
So, as I say, it's engaging, it's funny, it's pretty honest about what you're talking about, and it's also got brilliant takeaways that I think can make you a great salesperson. So,
Yeah.
when you first thought about doing this, tell me what the motivation behind it was.
Yeah, sure. So when I was doing these sales engagements as a consultant, often I would do these sort of sales health checks and just critique a particular company's approach, you know, how they present, how they demonstrate their software, what their messaging is, what their website looks like, what their brochures are, and then part of my engagement is to then write a report with areas that I feel could be improved. And as a result of that, I was drawing up and building these best practice guides, you know, on how to present best and these sorts of things. And then I just had the light bulb moment. I thought, this would be good as a book. And very much driven by the fact that sometimes I make mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all do. But they can be quite basic ones. And they can be because we're so overwhelmed with 500 different things that we're doing.
Yeah.
We've got a meeting, and it was a meeting we've been trying to get for, 3 months, and we've got the meeting, and then for some reason we're complacent. And we just go into the meeting, I've been selling for 30 years, I don't need to prepare, I know what I'm talking about. And then you leave the meeting and you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve, and you think, that didn't go quite so well. Why is that? Oh, well, that's because I didn't set a very clear in my mind what my advance, how I wanted to advance the sale, and I've allowed to lose control. So I just thought this is going to be really valuable for me as well, and for hundreds of thousands of other B2B salespeople that have busy, challenging jobs. They have a huge breadth of skills that they need to keep on top of. And if you haven't done, business development emails for 3 months or something because you've been busy trying to close some big contracts, and you decide, one morning I'm going to do some, cold calling, let's call it that, then 10 minutes to remind yourself of the do's and don'ts, invaluable.
Yeah.
Otherwise you could just waste your mornings sending stupid emails and this sort of thing. So so that's pretty much it.
Love that. And you've been getting good feedback?
Very good feedback, thank you. Yeah,
Good.
So I'm really flattered by some of the comments I've had back, and so I'm really pleased.
So far, so good with it all.
Pleased.
I also want to talk about the day job that you're doing at the moment, because
Sure.
I think that's sort of I've seen more and more people go to that sort of portfolio piece. I met someone yesterday who's doing some really good stuff in it, and I think there's an appetite from companies to sort of bring those. For want of a better expression, guns for hire in to to be able to improve their sales process. And I sometimes think it's the best gig in the world, right? Because I remember watching 10, 15 years ago on Sky One, there was a program called Badger or Bust. Okay. And it was by someone who came third or fourth in The Apprentice. This sort of bulldog called Ruth Badger.
Oh, Badger!
And,
I remember the name.
yeah. And she would basically be going to these businesses, these sales businesses, who were struggling,
right?
And she'd spend a sort of an episode going around there and finding out what they were doing, and it was always sort of fairly rudimentary, obvious things. And then the story was with it inevitably that within a day of working with the Badger, you've gone from bust through to getting your business back on track. And I always loved it, and I thought, Jesus, that's such a good job, isn't it, to be able to go in there. And the things she was pointing out were pretty obvious things that people could be doing. And I think that external piece is important, right? Because you can be sat there, and I've got 3 companies in this group, and the ability to go in there and see it from a different set of eyes than the guys that are doing it is quite. Someone came to me with a problem this morning, and I think they're looking at the wrong area of the problem for it. And so I'm quite intrigued about, just to ask you from your take to start to wrap things up, is how you look at these sort of things, and how easy it is to add value in your role, and what sort of value you can add to companies.
Yeah. So what, and again it does align a little bit with the book, is once you go into consulting and you go in and critique a company, and that company may well be very successful. My first gig was a company that had been functioning for 20 years. It didn't need me to come in. It wasn't troubleshooting or anything. They just wanted a new pair of eyes. And what I spotted is that you don't realise how much I know. Because I've been doing it for 30 years. I've accumulated this huge raft of knowledge. Don't always put it into practice, but that's, hence the book. And therefore, there are always areas of an operation, a fintech that can be improved, and the impact those improvements on their bottom line and how successful they are. So I'm really pleased that I feel I'm adding more value than I expected when I started my own consultancy. Yeah. So there is a lot of areas that I think fintechs can improve on from a sales effectiveness point of view. Yeah. Just before we started, I mentioned the presentations. There are still some really awful presentations out there. I mean, awful.
I look past the camera there at one which we saw this morning, which is requires a bit of work, but right. Yeah, look, I absolutely agree, and I think the ability to come in there and add value to those sort of things is invaluable to to businesses as well. So, Michael, let's finish up by who should be reading the book. Number one, who should be reaching out to you for the day job. Number two, and number three is what's the best way of them getting in touch with you?
Yeah, great. So the book is particularly suited for B2B salespeople.
There it is.
There it is, and B2B salespeople. And also business owners. So this is what I've observed, and this is a lot of the assignments I get, is that they will be an SME that's had some early success through the enthusiasm, knowledge of the founder or the CTO, but they then need to improve. But they're not salespeople.
Yeah.
They're business owners. They've come up with some brilliant idea which is going to be successful, but they're not salespeople. So if they were to read this as well, they would inherit some best practices that I think would improve their performance. So that's who it's best suited for. Second question was the type of company. So I specialise very much in the SME market. So I offer sales health checks. I can be a gun for hire, if you call it. So I do a lot of assignments for foreign-based companies that wish to enter the UK. So I'm representing a New York company and an Australian one. And I work, X days a month for them, representing them. And then the third one, with such a unique name, LinkedIn. Just contacting me through LinkedIn. That would be the easiest, and I'd love to communicate with anyone.
In touch. Yeah. Well, look, I can highly recommend a read of the book. It's it's got some great stuff in it, some things that I've certainly taken and looked to put in the business straight away as well. I think with most books there, once you've had a sort of career in sales, there's never going to be anything that sort of revolutionises what you're doing. But I think it's about putting it into a formula and having those sort of aid memoirs about what you can do and where you can go well. And I think that the beauty of this is, whilst it's not, I've worked in recruitment as opposed to financial technology sales, but all of the structure of what you're talking about in this resonates throughout all of it. So whether you're in sales and financial services or beyond and watching this, I'd highly recommend it as a thoroughly engaging read. And Michael, good. Absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thanks for coming in.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much. Thanks, Toby.
And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.